Good morning to everyone. I hope you can all hear me. It's 11 o'clock and we have a fairly large contingent of participants who haven't logged in yet. We'll give them a couple more minutes, and then as soon as we have the bulk of the folks who have registered, then I will begin. The presentation itself is going to be about 30 minutes. At the end of that, I'll be sure to leave time for anyone who has any questions they want to raise. So if you just bear with me, I'll just give the rest of the registered people a couple more minutes. Okay, again, good morning, everybody. We have about a third of the folks here, but if they come in late, so be it. Everybody should have a chat box at the bottom of your screen, or to the right of your screen, or wherever you put it. So if you have any questions that you want to raise, then please do so in the chat box during the first 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it for discussion. So this is all about patterns of conduct risk, a topic that has become very significant in the last couple of years. And in that regard, we're going to be looking at five different areas. First of all, at a clear definition of what conduct risk is, the impact of social media, digital transparency, and data speeds, and the elements of harm that can impact trust and reputation of organizations, and then on to evidence-based regulation and oversight, which is the direction that all this seems to be going. And then finally, we'll briefly look at evidence-based operating models. So to get right into it, what exactly is conduct risk? Well, if you break it down into two things, conduct is the way that a person behaves, the way that a process is executed, and just a general way that things are run in an organization. And then risk, according to ISO 31000, is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So it will have either a positive or a negative effect. So if you combine those two, you get the definition of conduct risk that we are generally using, which is broadly defined as actions of individuals and organizations that could bring harm to your customers, to your stakeholders, have a bad effect on the market. But the really important thing is the effect that it could have on trust that people have in you or the organization, and the reputation that you have. So if you consider what has conduct risk cost the industry, the enterprise concerns around the world, it's been billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, and banks alone have paid about 375 billion of those fines. So while this is considered a non-financial risk, it has some real financial impact and consequences. And there's been an awful lot of focus by regulators around the world, not just regulators, but various authoritative bodies on these non-financial risks. And, companies are going to continue to face pressure. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And one of the things that we're going to talk about here is going to be patterns. And when you come to identify the patterns and some of the key points that are going to be made here, you're going to find that we're reaching a tipping point now, because of the seriousness of what has been going on. And so, why has this become such a big deal? Well, there's been examples where misconduct has actually been integrated into the business model. So, and that's, generally what we refer to as it's been institutionalized. So misconduct being institutionalized, A, is cause for concern, and B, you wonder how is it going to be removed. Then the next thing is it's been rationalized as well, oftentimes by leadership, not being challenged, not having enough diversity, and of course, fear in organizations is still pervasive. And then, of course, it's been socialized as well, across various different arenas. Then let's talk about the patterns a bit. So are we looking at a pattern, a trend, or an isolated event if a misconduct occurs in your organization? So what is a pattern? Well, basically, it's a regular and intelligible sequence that becomes discernible with certain actions or situations, which is very different from what a trend is. But, to have an example around a pattern, let's say, for example, you have a valued employee in your organization that starts coming in late or starts to produce poor work. Well, it might seem like an isolated incident. And if you deal with that situation and everything goes back to normal, then you think you've dealt with it. However, if you see that this is happening to other employees in the same department, in the same business unit, and so on, you start to take a step back and really begin to evaluate the behaviors, what leadership is saying or doing, and so on. You start to find that certain behaviors are revealing themselves. And so now what you've got, if you've taken a step back and looked across, is you now have a data set. And you start to look for certain discernible actions and situations. And the patterns that you identify will begin to repeat themselves. So, the value of understanding a pattern is that you can actually start to quantify its effect. For example, the example I used with an employee coming in late or producing bad work, that could have an impact on productivity. And so, if you look at a forest, for example, that's overgrown and looks mismanaged and so on, once the bad trees start to fall away, you start to see that it's not really chaotic, but there truly is order in patterns. Trends are very different. Trends are basically just a general direction. A lot of people would say that trends are reflected in something like climate change. So there's a continuing trend with ice caps melting, or there is a trend in fashion, which way the skirt lengths go up or down. Certainly the ash beetle that is eating away and destroying trees, it's trending to destroy over 1 million trees this year. So there's a very real reason why we have to look at patterns, and why this is a very important time to be aware of the distinction between the two. What I'll do is I'll now turn it over to my colleague who is on the line, Neil Oswald, and he's going to talk about the impact of patterns. Go ahead, Neil.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? 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 Hello, can you hear me? Hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you, sorry. So there's lots of noise in the background. So if you can think about 3 things that are happening in the marketplace. We have a shift in people becoming more market focused. We have a shift in becoming more integrated in evidence and with evidence. And we're also starting to see people design, not re-engineer. And so why this is important for the topic today is because people are using evidence and the new capability about measurement that is to measure the right behavior. So people are measuring segment performance, interactions, and journey performance during execution. They're also measuring employee performance and behavior from a client perspective. And they're also measuring how people are performing by client group. And they're using process-based interactions and triggers and patterns to recognize what is happening in their organization. So companies are investing in analytics to identify patterns. When you talk about an AI engine, it's all about pattern recognition. It's all about seeing the pattern, seeing the what's going on underneath the covers. So people are building these analytical methods to measure process transparency, to create visibility, to measure the right behavior from a conduct perspective. What they're also trying to do is the regulators are starting to demand evidence-based proof of compliance and proof of what you're doing. So working across IT teams, user experience teams, security teams, marketing teams, and sales disciplines, we're starting to bring cross-functional teams to bring the information together to transform the business processes, to focus on being operationally excellent and delivering on the promises that we have. So that's delivering on promises to build trust. And then you're also moving to design, not re-engineering. And the point here is that people should not just be fixing Form 32B in their processes. They should be thinking about an end-to-end design and using the current technology, the current analytics, and the requirement to serve your customer to redesign your processes on an end-to-end basis to drive the right behavior in front of the customer and also build an evidence-based operating model. What that takes, of course, is leadership, vision, and persistence. It takes a lot of focus to get that done right. So those 3 paradigms are what I was asked to speak about: shift to market-based, integrated and evidence-based, and design, not re-engineering. That's good? I'll
Perfect.
turn it back to you.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll come back
Sorry
to you
about
again
the
shortly.
sorry about the communication problem. I guess it was something with the computer.
No problem. I think we're all good now. Thank you. Okay, so so that was Neil Oswald, my colleague, who's expert in this area. So what the point I want to make next is these three shifts, very important. If companies are going to adapt to them, they will, of course, build trust, have good reputations, and do it with leadership and vision, of course. Now, the impact that all of this is going to have is going to be very significant. And it is going to impact social media, the digital transparency of companies, and the speed of data with which they're able to operate. Now, these three items are also going to have a huge impact on conduct and the trust. I'm not going to read the screen because everybody will be able to get a copy of this after we're finished. But basically, if you consider what has happened with social media in the last couple of years, the biggest example is what's going on with Facebook right now, and how social media really crossed what was before a blurred line into business, specifically with how Cambridge Analytica was using data. Digital transparency, again, is there's no place left to hide. And so the whole thing with fake has come up, fake news, fake identities, and so on. So there's starting to be some growing fears and anxieties around the amount of transparency that is available, and particularly in communication. And then lastly, speed of data. Data is moving far, far faster than individuals are actually able to move, in terms of how quickly they can make a decision, how they can use that information, because they got so much more information than they might actually need, and the time to get through it. However, there's a real technical edge that you can have with having very high speed data. But how that data is used, how it's integrated, is where some of the questionable conduct and trust comes into question. One of the big examples I can quote here is WikiLeaks. Right, so WikiLeaks was able to dispense data very, very quickly before people were actually able to put a stop to any of that. So when you combine the three factors that Neil was talking about, plus the effects of social media, transparency, and speed, you now get into the issues that can really harm trust and reputation. And so I'm going to turn it over back to Neil to talk a little bit about that. Neil?
Neil again. So if you think about it, I'm waiting for the screen to go a little bit. Is the screen moving? Yes, there you go. So what harms trust and reputation? If you think about putting clients at the center, you have internal drivers of how you behave in front of clients, and you have external drivers about how you deal with clients. So start with the external first. You have competitors who you deal with, regulators who you deal with, markets who you deal in, and products and services you provide. That is a contract with the client for what you do in the marketplace. Internally, you need to deliver the right culture behavior, manage your risk, build your operating model, and determine how you will respond as an organization to continuously build trust, brand, and relationships. At the center, the client must be at the center, and you must build a contract with the client to deliver as promised with integrity, competence, character, and compliance. So people are struggling to keep up, but the point of this is that people can now do this with the current technology. They can design their processes on an end-to-end basis using measurement and automation to deliver on the promise as intended. And this is using things like robotic process automation, this is using things like standard APIs, using things like microservices. You can drive an event-based architecture to deliver what you need to do in front of the client. That's it.
Thank you. So having said all that, preventing harm has been really one of the greatest drivers of change. All this really to say that just reporting on compliance and just reporting on the various ratios that organizations have and so on is not enough. It now has to be demonstrated. It has to be evidenced. And so with the three paradigm shifts that we've been talking about at an enterprise level, externally driven, there is another kind of paradigm shift that is going to be happening. And so evidence-based regulation is really what is going to drive that. So, up until now, financial institutions, and this is really specifically applicable to financial institutions, there's been three lines of defense. And despite that, non-financial risks are still growing and they persist. And internal audit, a key function in risk management as well as the internal audit role, they typically have come in and looked at what has gone wrong, but they have not, certainly evidence does not indicate that they have been active in preventing any kind of risk from turning into a real event. So we see three more paradigm shifts happening at the organizational level. And that's going to be driven by conduct risk, the changes in regulations, and more. And so the three are, there's going to be a call for redefining roles and responsibilities. So like Neil was talking about, end-to-end process design in roles and responsibilities end-to-end is going to be crucial, and it's going to have to start with the board and down through levels of management and then non-management roles. And it's going to have to align the responsibilities in such a way to increase effectiveness and the efficiency of the various control measures and measures in general that Neil was talking about. But more to the point, it's to better engage with the board on the non-financial risks, because having risk in risk management department or financial control or compliance is not enough. It has to be at the front lines. So managing it, not just reporting on it. The second shift we see is going to be with integrating risk management enablers. And one of the first that's going to have to be integrated is a common language for everyone. We've been talking about this for 15 years, if not more. But a common taxonomy across an entire institution as regards risk and various categories of risk is going to be absolutely essential. And setting up a current, updated framework that is not just going to be about defense, but also the kind that is going to enable risk-taking through innovation and just taking a step towards a leading edge, and being much more forward-looking in the way risk management is being treated. So if it's integrated at all levels of an organization, because it's been integrated as part of their jobs, roles, responsibilities, and so on, it should be much more forward-looking. And at all levels of an organization should be able to do more quantitative risk assessments. And then the last one is business transformation. So along with that is also culture and process transformation. So Neil touched on process, but it's really about being able to organize and then design the process end to end around structural and strategic initiatives. So not re-engineering where you're just tweaking it or you're moving, the same players around. This is a situation where you might actually have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe keep some of the valuable components, but a lot of it will probably have to go. The paradigm shifts and regulation, evidence-based regulations have been in the works, and they've been published and are continuing to be published across multiple industries. So this isn't just financial services. This goes way beyond. So it's been about a year since these have been out there and have been published. They are continuing to be updated. If you're familiar with the COSO framework, they are also doing more updates. The interesting one is the one that's coming out of the Financial Stability Board, which is an international authoritative body. And they are primarily looking at governance frameworks. The belief is, and I would agree with them, is that it all starts with governance, and that there should be reviews across organizations as well as the national and regional regulatory and authoritative bodies to actually look at their regulations, look at policies and structures, look at processes to make sure that it does support a modern and updated governance framework. So there's about 10 different themes that have come out of that. And now they're moving into phase 2. And this is why, I think the rubber is starting to hit the road, because there are three really significant themes that regulators are looking at very closely. And each of these three themes have a very significant interplay. And that is, what is it about your organizational culture that is driving misconduct? Why is it happening? And then there's the definition of individual responsibility and accountability. So that's what I was talking about earlier. But the one that's also giving a lot of concern is that rolling bad apple. And so if let's say, for example, a trader in a financial institution or an organization in one part of the country does an act, and he's fined and he's been banned from trading certain securities, well, he just moves to another jurisdiction in another part of the country, in Canada, certainly in a different province. And because all of the jurisdictions are not at this time all linked, they don't know that this person has, $1 million fine outstanding in another part of the country. So that is one of the instances of fragmentation in regulations that is starting to get a lot of attention. And what we have done is we've created a series of tools to help resolve some of these issues and to help organizations to move to evidence-based compliance and reduce their incidences of conduct risk. And the other area that we're also seeing very significant shifts is in the actual operating model. So, what does that really mean? Are we going from a more formal approach to a more informal approach to how we're doing business, to how our culture operates? Are we still going to be deal focused? Are we going to be more relationship focused? Are we going to be rigid in how we enforce things? Or are we going to be more accommodating depending on what the circumstances are? Or are we going to be much more conservative? Or are we going to be very much speaking out about what's going on in an organization. So there's a significant cultural shift going on. Now, when you consider the medical profession has been operating with evidence-based models for years, not pharmaceutical, but certainly the medical profession has. Legal, law enforcement, they've been living by that code. First responders are continually trained so that they are driven by evidence-based requirements. And because there's a lot of examples where this is pre-existing, many, many sectors are going to be facing these massive business transformations over the next few years. That is going to have a direct effect on how they are conducting themselves and doing the business. And patterns will be changing. And they have already, but they will be, I believe, shifting considerably more. So to summarize it and keep to our promise of 30 minutes, we've been talking about the misconduct of people, process, systems, and external parties, and bringing much greater awareness of the patterns that are at play in each of these areas. We've been talking about two levels of paradigm shifts. The broader market paradigm shift and the more internal paradigm shifts that are going to have to happen in organizations. Now, this is new. It's only been a couple of years that this has really gotten anyone's attention. And so there are not a lot of tools out there. We've been working with organizations at the enterprise level to deal with conduct risk and have developed some tools to work with that, and have some technology partners as well that support the transition. But then, the thing that I think is going to get a number of organizations moving is to start to define what their target evidence-based operating model needs to look like. For those who have participated in this webinar, we've sent out a link to everybody. And if you would like to go to the link that was sent to you, there is a questionnaire of 10 questions that when you respond to that, we will provide you with an analysis that will give you a summary of some of the key patterns that may be operating in your organization. One of the things that we certainly recommend is that if you are starting down this path of creating a paradigm shift in your organization, we recommend that you ask for help. This is new, and if you haven't been involved in a lot of transformational projects in the past, this is one that I think is going to demand a lot of energy. I thank everybody for being on this call. I hope that what we have shared with you has resonated with some of you, and you've been able to identify some of the behaviors and patterns going on in your organization. Now, if you like, unmute yourself and you can ask questions, and we'll be available to ask questions, but to answer questions. But otherwise, this really concludes our portion of the presentation. And if you'd like to be in touch with us some other way, our contact information is also provided on the screen. Any questions from anyone? You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask away. Neil, did you want to add anything to what's been said? You're welcome to add anything.
Yeah, I'd just make the point that a lot of what's going on with digital transformation gives an opportunity to actually rethink what you do from a compliance perspective, and from a risk perspective, and from an operational excellence perspective. So I'd be looking to engage with people doing the digital transformation to do the design so that the compliance and risk and governance controls are in place and embedded in the new design as part of the way you typically do business as usual. And so rather than think of adding something on top of existing, design your compliance processes into the client journey, into the client experience, into the existing change agendas that are going on in your organizations, because the opportunity exists now to do that.
Thank you. A question was asked in the chat box: how is conduct risk different from operational risk? Well, it actually isn't. Conduct risk is really a subset of operational risk. The only business sector that calls it operational risk is financial services. Every other sector it's enterprise risk. So conduct risk is just one category of risk in an organization, and in a bank it's part of operational risk. Okay, we've left it open for questions. Got some in the chat box and they're being responded to, but if there are no other questions at this time, then you're certainly welcome. Many of you have found me on LinkedIn. If you have additional comments or questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to me there, or by email, or you can call. And if there are no other questions, then we can conclude this webinar. Thank you everyone for participating, and we look forward to having you next time.